Okay, I'm just gonna mute everybody, but feel free to unmute yourselves if you want to jump in to the conversation. And welcome everybody to Parsha Unpacked, Parsha's Balak. Very interesting Parsha, as we all know, because it's the only Parsha that has a talking donkey in it. Okay, but we're not going to talk. We're not going to focus too much on the talking donkey tonight. We'll save that for another time. So the basic background of this Parsha. The basic background is that there is a king, and he is the king of Moab. Moab is a country that borders Israel to the east, and it's probably in the area of where Jordan is today. And the king of Moab became very concerned because he heard about the Jewish people and he heard how they were marching towards the land of Israel, and he was fearful that they were going to become a significant enemy or potential combatant. So what did he do? He hired a non-Jewish prophet who was technically, we would call him a sorcerer, and his name was Bilam. And he hired Bilam to do his dirty work, and he charged him with the responsibility of coming and cursing the Jewish people. He figured if this sorcerer could curse the Jewish people, then all of their good fortune and all of their power would cease to be, and then he would be able to fight them in war and put an end to the Jewish people once and for all. But as we know the story, how it unfolds, Bilam comes, and first of all, he has an extended argument with his donkey, which is quite a fascinating thing. We see that his donkey actually, Hashem gives his donkey the ability to converse, and they have a conversation, which we'll talk about a little bit. And then he tries multiple times, 3 times, in fact, he tries to curse the Jewish people, but each time he tries to curse the Jewish people, instead what ends up happening is Hashem puts unintended words in his mouth, and he ends up actually blessing the Jewish people instead. So that's the basic outline of the story. And if I were to ask you, we could put it out there for a moment and see if anybody has an answer. If Bilam, this non-Jewish sorcerer, this wicked, evil person who's been hired, this hired gun that's come to curse the Jewish people, if we picture him as these sort of this sinister character in the Torah, who would we, if we had to pick somebody, a person in the Torah that would be the sort of antithesis of Bilam, sort of the anti-Bilam, the counter Bilam, who would we place as that individual? It's a question. It's a question. We don't necessarily need to answer, but it's a question.
How about Melchizedek?
Okay. Why would we pick him? That's not a bad answer.
Non-Jewish priest of El Elyon, but blesses Abraham.
Beautiful. I like that.
How about Moshe?
Okay, Moshe. How come Moshe, Les? Why Moshe?
Well, Bilam was the preeminent person in the non-Jewish world. Moshe is the preeminent person in the Jewish world.
Okay.
There's a certain fairness there with regard to resources.
Yep. I would have gone with Les had I not learned what we're about to see and learn right now. I would have gone with what Les said. I would have probably assumed it was Moshe, because Moshe was the greatest prophet the Jewish people had, and Bilam was the greatest prophet that the non-Jews had. So it would seem to be a parallel there. But in fact, we're going to actually find out, a little bit surprising maybe, that the anti-Bilam, or the antithesis of Bilam, is actually Avraham, according to the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. So the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which we're going to focus on a lot tonight, it starts off, this is just the beginning. We'll see a little bit more of it as we go on. But the Mishnah says, whoever possesses these three things, and we'll find out what the three things are momentarily, but for now, let's just leave that aside. Whoever possesses these three traits, these three qualities, is of the disciples of Abraham, our father. And whoever possesses three other things, which are the exact opposite traits, we'll see soon, is of the disciples of Bilam Harasha, Bilam the wicked. So the Mishnah seems to be comparing Avraham, interestingly enough, Abraham, our forefather, to Bilam. And the truth is that when we look at some of the verses in the Torah, we find what I think is a pretty clear flag that the Torah seems to be using to connect these two individuals, Avraham and Bilam. There are a number of parallels in the nuances of the language of the Torah that seem to connect these two. So I'll give you a few examples. So for example, we find out that when Bilam is on his way to go and curse the Jewish people, it says, V'yakom Bilam baboker, he rose early in the morning, V'yachavosh asono, and he saddled his donkey. And the commentaries point out that he did it himself, which is surprising considering he had a considerable entourage of people who, could have done it for him or on his behalf. So we see, what do we know about Bilam? When he sets out on his journey, he goes ahead on his own and saddles his donkey. Does that sound familiar? It should, because we learned a very similar thing by Abraham when he was on his way to perform the Akedah. V'yashkem Avraham ba'boker v'yachavoshes chamoro. And Abraham woke up early in the morning, and what did he do? He saddled his donkey. Okay, so we see right away an interesting parallel between Bilam and Abraham, that they both go to saddle their own donkey. I want to read to you a note. This is in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash on page 860. It's note number 21. And it's basically based on Rashi and the Gemara and the Talmud and Sanhedrin. The sages describe Bilam's enthusiasm contemptuously. Hatred causes people to violate norms of conduct. Surely it was not fitting for a man of Bilam's stature to saddle his own donkey, but he hated the Jewish people so much that he did not let dignity stand in his way and even got up early in the morning to do it. God said, "Wicked one, their forefather Abraham preceded you, for he got up even earlier and saddled his own donkey to do my will and take his beloved son Isaac to slaughter." So what do we see? We see that there's this interesting parallel between Bilam and Abram, that they both, in their zrizus, in their enthusiasm for what they were about to perform, they both are recorded in the Torah as having woken up early and saddled their own donkeys. Okay? Now, there's another interesting connection. Let's just go back to the verse with Avraham. It says, again, V'yashkim Avram baboker. Avram got up early the next morning and he saddled his own donkey. And then it says, Vayikach es shnei ne'arav ito. He took with him his two lads, ne'arav. He took with him his two servants, his two lads. That's who he brought with him on his journey to go perform the Akedah. And I believe those were Eliezer and Ishmael, if I'm not mistaken. So he took his two ne'arav ito, he took his two lads with him. And we find the identical thing with Bilam. He was riding on his donkey with his two ushnei ne'arav imo, and he had his two ne'arav, his two lads, servants, whatever, with him. So again, the Torah uses this identical type of language. Ushnei ne'arav imo, his two lads were with him. Shnei ne'arav ito, his two lads were with him. By the way, you may have noticed that when it came to Avraham, it says Shnei ne'arav, his two lads were with him, and the Torah uses the word ito for with him. And when it comes to Bilam, it says Ushnei ne'arav imo, his two lads were with him, but the Torah uses a different word. Instead of saying ito to mean with him, it says imo. And we'll discuss in a little later, what the significance of of that is. But either way, we see that both of these individuals brought their two Arav, their two lads, their two servants along with them. Another interesting parallel, okay? Now, another parallel that we see in the verses themselves is when it comes to Bilam, it says, Vayomer Elav Malach Hashem. The Malach of Hashem called out to him and said, why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? Okay, so we see that the Malach in the middle of this seminal event in Bilam's life where he's going on to perform his mission, the Malach, the angel of Hashem, calls out to him. And we see the exact same thing with the Akedah. V'yikra elav Malach Hashem in Hashemayim. The angel called out to Avram from Shemayim and said, Avram, al tishlach yadach el anar. Right? So we see the exact same thing over here, that both of them in the middle of their mission, going to perform their main moment, their main critical moment in their stories, they both get a call from a Malach Hashem. So clearly, you see that the Torah is connecting these two individuals. There seems to be some attempt on the part of the Torah to draw our attention to Avraham and Bilam as being opposite, perhaps, figures or opposite sides of the same coin. So we saw in Pirkei Avot that we said anyone who has certain attributes, 3 attributes, are like the disciples of Abraham, and whoever has 3 other attributes are like the disciples of Bilam. What are those attributes? Okay, so let's take a look and let's see. So let's just go back to the Hebrew for 1 minute. So the 3 attributes of Abraham are Ayin Tova, Ruach Nemucha, and Nefesh Shafala. And then for Bilam, his 3 attributes are the exact opposite. Ayin Tova means what? Ayin Tova means a good eye. And instead of Bilam having a good eye, he has Ayin Ra, a bad eye, an evil eye. Avram has a Ruach Nemucha. He's got a humble spirit. And Bilam has a Ruach Gavoha, a haughty or arrogant spirit. And finally, Avram has a Nefesh Shafala. He's got moderate or controlled, suppressed, or not suppressed, but controlled, regulated physical drives, lusts, and desires. And Bilam has a Nefesh Rechava, uncontrollable lusts and desires. So let's just read it here. Avram, a good eye, a humble spirit, and moderate lusts and desires. If a person has those 3 good qualities, he is of the disciples of Avraham Avinu. But if a person has an evil eye, a haughty spirit, and limitless lusts and desires, he is of the disciples of Bilam HaRasha, of Bilam the wicked. But right away, it becomes clear that the Torah is connecting these 2 individuals. And not only is the Torah connecting these 2 individuals, but the chapter, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot is clearly connecting these 2 individuals and saying they're opposites. They're opposites. Avram stood for 3 good qualities: a good eye, humble spirit, moderate, controlled, regulated lusts and desires. Bilam was the exact opposite, an evil eye. He had a haughty, arrogant spirit. He was a conceited, arrogant person, and he had uncontrollable, limitless lusts and desires. So how do we understand this? What's the significance of these 3 particular traits? Why are they singled out? What's going on over here? So we need to build up a little bit. And in order to do this, we're going to review some things that we've learned in the past, probably many times. And I wanted to start by sharing another very important quote from Pirkei Avos, from the Ethics of Our Fathers. And that quote is as follows: Rebbe Elazar HaKafar Omer. Rebbe Elazar said, Hakina v'hata'ava v'hakavod motziin es ha'adam min ha'olam. 3 things. three negative traits, three bad human qualities. If a person has these three qualities, if a person is overcome by these three negative traits, they take a person out of this world. What are these three traits? Kina, taiva, and kavod. Kina is envy or jealousy. Taiva is lust. And kavod is the desire for honor. If a person has these three traits, these particular three traits, they're gone. They're not even here. They may look like they're alive. They may be walking around. They may be happy looking and successful, but the truth of the matter is they're motzin es adam min ha'olam. They do not even exist. And the question is, why does this great tzaddik, or Belazar HaKafar, single out these three traits? There are a lot of bad traits, like anger, kas. That's a bad trait. Laziness, stinginess. There are a lot of bad traits. And he doesn't say about those traits that if a person has these traits, he's not in the world. He's taken out of the world. He might agree they're bad. Of course, he would agree they're bad traits, but it's these three and only these three which are motzi'in es ha'adam min ha'olam, that if a person has these three traits, their life is not a life. They're not here. It might look like they're here, but they're not really here. Why is that? What is it about these three traits? So I'm sure you probably see where we're going with this, and many of you know and recall from previous learning that you've done or that we've done together, that there's another very famous statement in Pirkei Avos, possibly the most famous statement in the Ethics of Our Fathers, and that is the Shimon HaTzadik statement. Shimon HaTzadik, Hayam Yishari Knesset HaGedola. Shimon HaTzadik, he was the very last person, last member of the men of the Great Assembly. Hu Hayomer, and he used to say, and everybody knows this, Al Shlosha Devarim Ha'olam Hameh. There are songs about it. There's all kinds of, great talks and discussions about this topic. Al Shlosha Devarim Ha'olam Hameh. The world stands upon three pillars. What are they? Al HaTorah, the Al Avoda, the Al Gemilus Chasadim. The world stands on Torah, on the Avoda, which we understand to be the service of Hashem through the temple, or more contemporarily now without the Beis Hamikdash, temple in Jerusalem, through prayer. And the third one is Gimilut Chasadim, acts or practicing acts of kindness. We know that these are the three pillars that the world stands on. And we spoke about this before when we studied the Maharal a little bit. The Maharal is very clear and explains why these are the three pillars that the world stands on. And he says basically that there are, sure you remember, we talked about this many times, that the Maharal says there are three essential relationships, three primary human connections that a person is put down into this world to work on and to develop and to nurture and ultimately to perfect. What are those three relationships? So the relationship that I have with myself, meaning a person and their own within themselves, within their own human self, between their body and their own soul and their own body. That's one relationship. Then there's another relationship, which is the relationship of me and to God, my relationship with my creator. And finally, the third relationship is me and other people. Three essential relationships. It's a very simple construct and a simple way of looking at the world. I'm here for basically three reasons. I've got to work on my relationship within myself, my own internal relationship between my body and my soul. I have to work on my relationship with me and my creator, just the two of us. And I have to work on and develop my relationships with God. The three pillars, the pillar of Torah, the pillar of Avoda, and the pillar of Chesed, correspond directly to these three relationships the Maharal explained to us and taught us. So for example, Torah means like this. Look, I have a body, and my body wants certain things. It wants to eat, it wants to sleep, it wants to enjoy physical pleasures of all form, indulge and enjoy. That's what my body wants. And it's pre-programmed to desire and to seek those pleasures. My soul, on the other hand, has no interest in those physical desires or physical pleasures. It gets no pleasure from them whatsoever. The soul wants connection to God. The soul wants spirituality. The soul wants to reach my potential. The soul wants all these godly things. And now I have a struggle within me. It's an ongoing struggle, right? And the struggle is to remember that I'm a soul, not a body. I'm a soul that has a body. I'm not a body that has a soul. And that is something that we work on our whole lives. What gives us the guidelines, what informs us, what leads us, what's the roadmap to help us successfully empower the soul over the body, so that the soul is the rider and the body is the horse, and the relationship between the body and the soul is that of the horse and the rider and the horse, and that we have the ability to to make decisions in our life. Our main primary decisions, our critical decisions, are made as souls in sync with our higher selves, and not as bodies in sync with our lower selves. What guides us and allows us to be able to do that? Torah. That's what the Torah is. The Torah is there to guide us. It's the roadmap. It's the instruction book on how to reach a shlemus, a wholeness, a synchronicity between the body and the soul. Without Torah to guide us, without the morality and the holiness of Torah, then our body and soul relationship cannot ever possibly be perfected. Okay, so that's the pillar of Torah. Now we have a pillar of avoda. What's the pillar of avoda? Temple service or prayer or whatever you want to plug into the meaning of avoda. Avoda is me and God. Me and God. I have a relationship with my creator. It's the relationship that I was created for. And that's what avoda is all about. Avoda is prayer. Prayer is me speaking to God, me relating to God, me submitting myself to the will of God, transforming my will, aligning my will with the will of Hashem. That's what avoda is all about. And of course, gimilut chasadim, chesed, acts of loving kindness, are there to help me in my development of my relationships with other people, right? God doesn't just want me to focus on my relationship between my body and my soul and to focus on my relationship with God. He wants us, if that's what Hashem wanted, then he could have just created us as individuals. Each, there are billions and billions of planets in the universe. Hashem could have given us each our own planet and put us on our own planet, and we could have been happy. We could have worked on ourselves and worked on our relationship with God, and everything would have been perfect. But instead, he took all of the human beings, all 7 billion of us, or however many there are, and put us all in one little place. Why is that? Because until I can perfect my body-soul relationship, and I can perfect my relationship with God, but until I have perfected my relationship with other human beings, I'm imperfect. I'm not whole. I'm not complete. So these are the 3 relationships that God put us in this world to work on and to nurture and to develop. And that's why these 3 pillars are the pillars that the world stands on. Of course, when you understand this and know this, so many things begin to make sense. We know why now there had to be 3 avos. Why did there have to be 3 patriarchs? Why not 2? Why not 4? Because each one had to develop and blaze the trail of one of these areas. So Abraham, of course, we know, blazes the trail of chesed. He's the greatest Bal chesed, the doer of kindness of all times. And Yitzchak, Isaac, who offers himself as a sacrifice on the altar to Hashem, is the pillar of avoda. And Yaakov is Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim. The Torah describes him as a man, a scholarly person who sat in the tents of Torah. That's of course the pillar of Torah. Now that we have 3 avot, 3 patriarchs, one building the pillar of chesed, one building the pillar of avoda, and one building the pillar of Torah, now we have a world. Now we have the pillars, 3 pillars that the world can stand on. So that's why we have to have 3 avos. And everything that you find in Torah that comes in 3s, we know that there are 3 transgressions, 3 Torah prohibitions that I have to be willing to give up my life for and not transgress. right? If somebody tells me, hey, it's Yom Kippur, eat this bacon double cheeseburger on Yom Kippur or I'm going to kill you. What do you say? Pass the ketchup, right? Go ahead, eat it. You don't violate, you don't give up your life for the mitzvos in the Torah. We're supposed to live by the Torah and not give up our life. But there are three mitzvos in the Torah that if I'm forced by gunpoint to perform, I have to give up my life. What are they? Idol worship, murder, and sexual immorality. Why these three things? Because each one of these three things undermines or eliminates or bulldozes one of the pillars that the world stands on. Idolatry, avodah zarah. That's the absolute undermining of the pillar of service of Hashem, of avodah, right? Idol worship. It's the ultimate rejection in the man to God relationship. Murder. What about murder? Murder is the ultimate rejection of the man-to-man relationship, the ultimate rejection. And sexual immorality means that there's been a total breakdown in my body-soul relationship. My body has taken over, and I've undermined the pillar of Torah. So each one of these three transgressions undermines a different one of the three pillars of the Torah. That's why in the times of Noah, the world had to be destroyed, because mankind had been engaged in these three primary transgressions, and they had removed or destroyed the pillars that the world was standing on. The flood wasn't a punishment for mankind. It was just a reality that the world couldn't stand anymore because humanity had destroyed the pillars that the world stands on. So these are the three things. And now we can go back to the statement that we had, which is from Rabbi Elazar Hakfar, who famously said that there are three things that take a person out of this world. Three negative traits, three bad qualities. And he doesn't say anger, even though anger is a very devastating and dangerous quality. And he doesn't say laziness, and he doesn't say stinginess. He says three things: kina, ta'ava, kavod. Why? Because these three things are the direct opposites of the three pillars that the world stands on, the three relationships that I'm here to perfect. Kina, what's kina? Kina is jealousy. Kina means that instead of seeing another person as an opportunity to give, instead of trying to perfect my relationships with other people by giving to them and thinking about them and caring for them, all I can do is be jealous of what they have. It's a breakdown in the man-to-man relationship. It undermines the pillar of chesed. Taiva, what's taiva? Taiva is lust. It's uncontrollable lust. My desires, my physical drives have taken me over. That's a breakdown in the man-to-self relationship. The man-to-self relationship, the body-soul. The soul is supposed to call the shots, not the body. The soul is supposed to lead the way. The rider is supposed to be in charge, not the horse. But when I'm engaged in taiva, I've undermined the pillar of Torah. I've undermined the purpose, the relationship between man and self. And finally, kavod. What is kavod? Kavod means I'm seeking honor. I need to be recognized. I need to be seen as the one who's in control, the top of the chain, not God. I am my own self-independent entity. I deserve honor. I deserve credit. That's the breakdown in the pillar of avoda. That's the breakdown in the man-to-God relationship. And therefore, these three things take a person out of the world. Why do they take a person out of the world? Because the whole purpose we're here in the world in the first place is to perfect these three things. That's why we're here. The Maharal says three relationships: man to self, man to man, man to God. If I'm caught up in kina, taiva, kavod, envy, lust, and desire for honor, then I'm my whole purpose in life is the opposite for what it was intended, which is to develop and establish and nurture these relationships. So therefore, there's a total breakdown in the three pillars. That means I'm not even in this world anymore. It might look like I'm here. I might walk down the street and wave to you when you see me, but I'm not here because I've undermined my own existence, my very own existence. That's what kina, taiva, and kavod is all about. Now, with this background, I think we can go back to our Mishnah about Avraham and Bilam. Let's look at it one more time. What do we say? If a person has three qualities, three positive attributes, they will be considered to be a disciple of Abraham. What are they? Ayin Tova, a good eye. What does an Ayin Tova mean? Rashi explains to us over here, it means that he does not suffer from envy or jealousy. He does not begrudge the other person. If somebody has a success, I'm happy for you. I don't view it in a jealous way. I'm not angry that I didn't have that level of success that you had. I have an ayin tova. I have a good eye. I'm happy for your happiness. I'm happy for your success. Ruach nemucha, a humble spirit. What does a humble spirit mean? Rashi says humble spirit means he doesn't seek honor. He's not looking for kavod. He's not looking to be seen as the top of the chain. And finally, a nefesh shafala, moderate or controlled, tempered lusts and desires, means that a person can operate with self-restraint and self-control and have control over our physical desires and impulses and use them appropriately, but not let them overrun us or take control of us. Okay, and the opposite, if you have the three opposite traits, then you're just like Bilam. You're one of his disciples. What are they? They're the three opposite traits. An evil eye. An evil eye means I'm just everything you have, I want. I can't be happy for you when you have something that I don't have. You got the promotion, I didn't get the promotion. You're going on vacation and I'm not. I can't be happy for you. I'm jealous. I'm envious. Ruach Gavoa. Ruach Gavoa is a haughty spirit. It means that I'm arrogant. I'm conceited. I need honor. I need everybody to look up to me and respect me. And finally, Nefesh Rechava means I can't. My body is taken over. My body, my desires, my impulses, my lusts have completely overpowered me to the point where my soul is not even engaged anymore in the decision-making process. And a person who has those three traits is like a disciple of Bilam. And it's clear and obvious that these three things correspond directly to what? To kina, taiva, and kavod, envy, lust, and the desire for honor. So if a person has the three positive qualities and they've controlled, they've worked on, they've developed themselves to the point where they have overcome, or they're at least working on overcoming jealousy and desire and honor seeking, then they're a disciple of Abraham. And if not, they're a disciple of Bilam. Now, where do we see that Abraham had these three qualities? So let's first start with Ayin Tova. Ayin Tova means what? It means he's generous. He's not jealous. He sees other people, other human beings, as an opportunity to give. Abraham was the consummate giver. He was the great Baal Chesed. He was the one who was always looking for opportunities to give. We know that it says in Genesis 21 that Abraham planted a tamarisk, an eshel. It's a type of tree. What is an eshel? What does it mean he planted this tree in Beersheba? Why do we need to know he planted a tree? Who cares if he planted a tree? So Rashi tells us, what does it mean? That there's two opinions, Rav and Shmuel. One said it was an orchard from which to supply fruit for the guests at their meal. The other said it was an inn for lodging in which all kinds of fruit were served. Okay, so what do we see? We see that Abraham dedicated his life. He planted an eshel. And by the way, eshel is an acronym also for three words: achila, which means food; shtia, which means drink; and levia, which means accompaniment. Meaning he would give his guests what to eat, he would give them what to drink, and he would accompany them partially on their way to the next step in their journey. So that was Abraham. He was a person who had an ayin tova. He only wanted to give to the other. He had no interest in taking from others. We also know that he had an incredibly humble spirit. When he does something which he feels is a little bit stepping beyond his boundaries, when he begins to argue with Hashem over the city of Sodom, he says, Avram spoke up and says, here I venture to speak to my Lord. I who am but dust and ashes. He didn't think of himself, Avram didn't think of himself as being anything spectacular or so powerful or so important. He felt that he was dust and ashes compared to Hashem. And so he was humble. He was a humble spirit. And of course, we know that he had totally mastered his desires and lust to the point where he failed to even recognize or see how beautiful his own wife Sarah was until they went down to Egypt, and he all of a sudden realized that she was beautiful and that she was potentially going to be taken by the Egyptians. Until that point, the Talmud says he never even gazed upon his own wife in that type of way. So we see that Avram had these three positive qualities, whereas Bilam was the exact opposite. Bilam is always seeking honor. What does Bilam say? He wakes up in the morning, he says to Balak's dignitaries, go back to your own country. I'm not coming with you, for the Lord will not let me go with you. And Rashi says, what does it mean? What is he saying? I'm not going to go with you. I'm not going to go with you, but only with princes greater than you. It's beneath my dignity for me, someone of my stature, to go with lowly people like you. If you want me to come with you, you send princes of great stature, and then maybe I'll consider going with you, because he was incredibly arrogant. What else do we know about Bilam? He had no self-control over his physical desires. What does it say? It says Bilam replies to Balak and says, though Balak, even if he were to give me a house full of silver and gold, I wouldn't listen to him. And Rashi says, what does it mean? It means this tells us that he was avaricious and covetous of other people's wealth. Okay, so we see that he had that quality. And of course, we know he was jealous too. And it says that Visa Bilam es Einav, Bilam looked up and saw Israel encamped by tribe. And Rashi says, what does it mean? He wished to cast an evil eye upon them. He was jealous when he saw the Jewish people so successful and so happy and so healthy. He tried to cast an evil eye upon them because he couldn't stand seeing this display of healthy, well-adjusted home life in among the Jewish people. So Rashi says, thus you have his three characteristics: an evil eye mentioned here, and pride and greed, which have been mentioned above. So you see that Bilam had these opposite three traits. There's a lot more to say about this, but I want to move on a little bit. But I will just say there's one more interesting point. Let's just say over here that when he gets into this argument with his donkey, Bilam starts arguing with his donkey, and the donkey says, "What have I done to you that you've beaten me these 3 times?" Now, the normal way in Hebrew to say 3 times would be shalosh pi'amim, 3 times. But it doesn't say shalosh pi'amim. It says shalosh rigalim, 3 times. It's an unusual way of saying 3 times. And if you focus on that word, shalosh rigalim, we know, we're familiar, shalosh rigalim refers to what? The 3 festivals, the 3 chagim, shalosh rigalim are what? Pesach, Sukkot, and Shavuos. And I'll leave this for homework for you, but the commentaries point out, the Arizal and others say that Bilam wasn't trying to destroy the Jewish people directly. What he was trying to do was to uproot their shalosh regalim, their 3 holidays, their 3 festivals. And Bilam said, if I can get the Jewish people to not observe or to no longer have a connection to Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, then that will spell the end of the Jewish people. Now, why is that? Because each one of these 3 festivals is designed to replenish the attributes of Ayin Tova, Ruach Nemucha, and Nefesh Shafal. These 3 attributes, right? Because, for example, Shavuos. What is Shavuos? Shavuos is when we got the Torah. What is the Torah? The pillar of the Torah is the pillar that helps us to develop our relationship between us and ourselves, our body and our soul, right? Remember? So you see, each one of the holidays is there to replenish and to rebuild for the year our connection to the three different pillars that the world stands on. And therefore, he had to uproot these because he realized if we don't have that connection to replenish our reservoir of Torah, Avoda, and Chesed, then we will cease to be the unique people that we are. And that was his approach to trying to destroy the Jewish people. Okay. But there's one last thing that I want to focus on in the Mishnah. The Mishnah goes on a little bit. The Mishnah goes on just a little bit further. So we've said up until now, right, that if a person is working hard, dedicating their lives, investing time and energy into eliminating jealousy and uncontrollable lusts and honor seeking from their lives, and they're working to develop their relationship between man to man to God, and man to self, then they're considered to be a disciple of Abraham. And by the way, it doesn't matter if they're part of the Jewish people or not part of the Jewish people. The commentaries point out that anybody whose life is directed in this way will be considered to be a disciple of Abraham, because don't forget, Abraham was the father of all nations, all monotheistic nations. So you can be a disciple of Abraham. But if a person is falling victim to jealousy and uncontrollable lusts and desires and honor seeking, and they're failing to invest or perfect, nurture those three critical relationships, man to man, man to self, man to God, then they are considered to be a disciple of Balaam. And again, whether they're Jewish or not. So a person has to choose. There are two philosophies, there are two schools of thought out there in the world. There's the base medrash of Avraham, and there's the base medrash of Balaam. There's the school of Avraham and the school of Balaam. And everybody has to decide which school they belong to, which philosophy, which house are they a part of. But the Mishnah finishes off with an interesting statement. See, if you're really thinking about it up until this point, you might have one reservation, and that is as follows. If I really commit, if I really dedicate myself to uprooting these attributes, then yeah, okay, I'm going to have a wonderful eternal existence in the world to come. But my life in this world, in Olam Hazeh, is going to be pretty boring and pretty unexciting and pretty difficult and challenging, right? For example, if I'm working super hard and fighting against taiva, fighting against my, gratifying my physical desires and impulses, I'm going to have to give up all the pleasures that I enjoy. I'm going to have to give up the food that I like because it might not be kosher. Even if it is kosher, maybe I'm eating too much of it. I'm going to have to give up all the things that I'm going to have to give up my vacations, and I'm going to have to give up, sexuality and all the physical drives. If I really want to fight against taiva, I'm going to have to give up so many of my physical pleasures. And if I want to fight against honor seeking and kavod, then I'm going to have to be like, what am I going to be like, this little meek person behind the scenes? I'm not going to get any, recognition or credit. And if I'm fighting against jealousy, that means all the time, I'm always going to have to put the other person's needs before my own needs. If I do all this, then what's my life going to even look like here? Yeah, I'll have a wonderful share in the world to come, but my life here is going to be miserable. So the Mishnah comes along and says something very important. The disciples of Abraham, our father, enjoy this world and inherit the world to come. As it says, I will endow those who love me with substance. That's referring to this world. I will fill their treasuries. That's referring to the world to come. And what the Mishnah is telling us over here is a very important thing. Don't make the mistake and think that being a disciple of Abraham means that I'm trading this world, pleasure in this world, for pleasure in the next world. No, it's both. You get both. Because ultimately, if a person is working on overcoming their taiva, their lusts and desires, what that means really is that they're learning to prioritize pleasures in life. And yes, they might be sacrificing certain low-level pleasures, but what they're getting in exchange for it is much greater levels, higher levels of pleasure. If a person is working hard on fighting against honor seeking or fighting against jealousy, it only means that their life in this world is going to be so much more meaningful, so much more rewarding, so much deeper, so much more profound. And you're not giving up this world for the next world when you engage in the war against these three powers. But you're really, what you're doing is you're gaining pleasure and gaining meaning and happiness and depth in this world, as well as acquiring the greatest possible share in the world to come that you can. So that is, I think, how we can understand this Mishnah, and I think it's very, very powerful. But what I want to do with a little bit of time that we have left is take a look at one more element of this story. And this is really, it could be that we've been through this before in the past, but I can't teach this Parsha without sharing with you the following insight that was that comes from the Vilna Gaon. Okay, so let's try to spend 5 minutes and then we'll wrap it up over here. So there's a number of problems or difficulties, questions that come along with this story. So Balak, this king of Moab, sends messengers to this prophet, this non-Jewish sorcerer, Bilam, and he says the messengers come and they say, "Come and curse, come with us and curse the Jewish people. We're going to go and I'm going to bring you to the Jewish people and you're going to curse them." And what happens? God says to Bilam, he says, the first thing God says, because Bilam says, you know what? I'm going to ask God, see what he says. I'll use my prophecy. I'll see what God says and I'll do whatever he says. So God comes to Bilam and he says, do not go with them. Don't go. You must not curse that people, for they are blessed. Okay, so he gets a direct message from God. No, don't go. Stay where you are. Don't join these people. Don't join this entourage. Do not curse the Jewish people. Okay, fine. A few verses later, they beg. They basically beg and they nudge and they try to cajole Bilam into coming. And Bilam says, okay, you know what? I'll ask God one more time. Maybe he'll change his mind. Let me ask God once again. So he asks God again, can he go? And that night, God comes to Bilam and he says to him, if these men have come to invite you, you may go with them. But whatever I command you shall do. Okay? So it seems that God has changed his mind. Right? God said, first he said, do not go. Right? We have evidence right here. God said, do not go with them. And all of a sudden here, the second time, when Bilam nudges a little bit, it says, finally God says to him, okay, you want to go, you can go. Okay? God gives him permission. The very next verse, Bilam arises early in the morning, he saddles his donkey, and he goes with the dignitaries from Moab, and he was told he could. He had permission. He was given a green light. Next verse, Vayichar af Elokimi. God is furious that he went. So he sends an angel to stop him and to get in his way. What do you mean? What happened? God just told him he could go. He said, can I go? God changed his mind, said, yeah, you can go. So now he goes, and now God's furious at him. Why is God so furious at him? It doesn't make any sense. Okay? And he sends an angel. What does he do? He sends an angel to try to stop him. Okay. Then what happens? A few verses later, finally, the angel calls out to Bilam and says, go with them, but you must say nothing except what I tell you. So Bilam goes on with Balak's dignitaries and he joins the Jewish people. And at that point, Rashi wakes up. And Rashi says, what does it mean that you can go with him? On the road that a man is resolved to go, he is allowed to go. Meaning God changed his mind and God finally decided to allow Bilam to go with Balak. But the problem is, why did Rashi wake up all of a sudden over here in verse 35 and not way back in verse 21 when God changed his mind the first time? It's only now that Rashi says, oh, see, God changed his mind because if a person really wants something badly enough, Hashem will let you do it even if it's not in your best interest. But Rashi should have said that a long time ago when he changed his mind the first time. So what is going on over here in this story? So I'll tell you what the Vilna Gaon says. It's absolutely incredible. And it all boils down to understanding the nuances in the Hebrew language. The Vilna Gaon says there are two different ways in the Hebrew language to say with. You can say im, means with, imo, with him, imochem, with them. That's the first way, using the root ayin mem. And that means, says the Vilna Gaon, to go with somebody in a total, complete sense. Physically, emotionally, intellectually, unified purpose, right? Which would mean, for example, let's say you and I are going together on a vacation, or we're going somewhere special together, and we're going with one another, and we're going for the same purpose and the same reason, and we have the same plans and the same dream and the same desire, then I am going imo. I'm going with him. I'm going with that person. Okay, I'm imochem. I'm going with you. But what if I'm on a plane going to New York, and there's a person passenger sitting next to me in the plane. I don't know that person. They're also going to New York. I could say I'm going with that person to New York, but then I wouldn't say I'm going imo. I would say I'm going ito. It's a different word, the word et. And that means with in a partial sense, meaning physically we're going to the same place, but not emotionally, intellectually. We're going for different purposes. We're both on the same plane. But I'm going on a vacation to, go to see some Broadway shows, and you're going for work. So I'm going ito. I'm going with him. We're both physically going to the same place, but we're not unified in purpose. Okay, those are two different words. They mean in English we would just say with, but in Hebrew is more nuanced. There's two different ways of saying with, imo or ito. Or if in the plural, imochem, with them, itam, with them. Okay, so now with that understanding, the Vilna Gaon says you have to go back and look at those verses one more time more carefully. And this is what he says. He says, the very first time, what does God say to Bilam? He says, God said to Bilam, do not go with them. And in Hebrew, it says, lo selech imohem. Do not go im. What does im mean? Let's go back. Im means with in a total sense, in a unified sense, physically, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, for the same reason. Meaning they're going to curse. They want to go to destroy the Jewish people. Don't go with them. I don't mind if you physically go there for your own interest. If you're going because you want to make money, if you're going because you need a job. I never told you couldn't do that. I didn't prohibit that. God didn't prohibit that. God just said, don't go imohem. Don't go with them if your purpose for going is the same as their purpose, which is to curse the Jewish people and to destroy the Jewish people. No, you do not have permission. Okay? If you're just going for your own reasons to make a few bucks, that has not yet been prohibited. Okay? Fine. Then what happens? They come and they beg him, and he says, let me ask one more time. And he goes back one more time. And finally Hashem says, kum lech itam. You may go with them, meaning physically. You can't go with them for the same reason. I'm not allowing that. But if you're going for your reasons and whatever, kum lech itam. Did Hashem change his mind at this point like we thought before? No, Hashem didn't change his mind. Nothing changed. He said, don't go imochem, but if you want, you can go itam. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. What happens? The next morning, Bilam wakes up, vayelech im sare Moab. He goes with the dignitaries of Moab, with meaning in the full unified sense of the word. Was he allowed to do that? Was he given permission to do that? Not at all. He was never given permission to do that, which is why in the next verse, Hashem is furious. Hashem was incensed that it's going. He was never allowed to go imahem. He was never allowed to go with them. Okay, and then this goes on, and then the donkey, and then the angel, and finally, Hashem says, "You know what? I've had enough. You really want this? This is really what you want? Lech im ha'anashim. You really want to go im with them in this sense? Go with them in the full unified sense." And that's where Rashi says God changed his mind. Why? Because if a person wants something badly enough, he'll let you have it. That's where Hashem changed his mind. That's the only time God changed his mind, because that was the only time up until now he was giving him permission to go itam, but he was not giving them permission to go imahem. Okay, so we see how that all fits together. Now, just to say the very last thing, if you remember, we said there was a comparison with Abraham and Bilam. They both had two lads. They both had two lads that traveled with them. But now that we know what we know, look at the language over here. Avram saddled his donkey, and he took v'yikach es shnei ni'arav ito. He took his two lads, he took his two children, these two youngsters, ito, with him. Bilam took his two lads, ushnei ni'arav imo. He took them with him in a different sense. And the Maharal explains, what are these lads? Why does it say lads all the time? So he says, the Maharal explains that the lads mean something deeper than just two young people. It means the lads refer to his lower self, his lower desires. Everybody has na'arim. We all have a kid inside of us, a lower part of ourselves, the physical lower drives within us. We all have them. But Bilam took his shnei ne'arav imo. He took them with them. They were indispensable. They were indistinguishable from who he was. They were very much entirely part and unified with his essence. Abraham's shnei ne'arav were ito. Yes, they were there because we all have them, but they were never fully unified with who he was, and that he was able to leave them aside and put them aside when called upon to do so. So again, we see this deep connection between Abraham and Bilam. Abraham had his lads, Ito. Bilam had his lads, his lower self, his lower part of his essence, of his being, Imo, in an indistinguishable way that was part of him that could not be separated. Okay, that's what I wanted to share tonight for Parsha Unpacked, Parsha's Balak. And if anybody would like to, at this point, jump in and ask some questions.